All right, so let's start with Robel's group. So you guys are looking at kind of how the slave codes changed. Go ahead.
Alright, so yeah, there are many ways the slave codes changed. Obviously, as Apple mentioned, the laws became more strict, specifically in Virginia. It was illegal for individuals to gather for religious services. And then also, um, another factor that changed was increased surveillance. Um, there were no gatherings because law enforcement and people in general thought just by being in close proximity to each other, they would like conspire or think of other ways, like Nat Turner's rebellion, to think of revolts, and so they just wanted to stop any sort of contact and communication in that way. And then there are harsher punishments not only for enslaved people, but also for freed slaves. Virginia's General Assembly talked about essentially deporting free slaves from the state, so that there's no chance for them to kind of imbue this idea of freedom to the enslaved people, like Nat Turner did, or like how Nat Turner's communication of freedom through religion played out in the same way. And then lastly, political and social implications of Nat Turner's rebellion.
Go ahead.
Sure. It accelerated the political climate kind of towards the Civil War. I was kind of thinking like whether it was inevitable or not. It kind of drew a line like less compromises could be made.
Okay.
People were getting twitchier.
Okay, and it makes sense. Like I always think about how, the 1780s, 1770s and 80s must have been an impossible time for white people to preserve slavery, because why? 1770s, 1760s, 1770s, 1780s. Why do you think it was very hard, or much harder, for white people to push slavery?
Were there more free blacks?
Okay, why else?
American Revolution.
Yeah, and what was going all throughout America?
They were saying everybody's free.
Yeah, they was talking about these ideas of natural rights, that the natural state of man is freedom. And so Robel brings up that in a lot of these states like Virginia, they're going to pass laws that basically say if you're free, you have to leave. You can't be in Virginia. They made laws against manumission. What's manumission? Does anyone know what manumission is, what that term means? If a slave is manumitted. So it's an owner freeing his slave. It became illegal to free your own slave. You weren't allowed to free your slave. And so, because perfectly, if you're a slave and you see a free black, what naturally comes into your mind? I should be free. I want to be free. And so that was like a very, and given the slave revolt, the fear rose so much that became kind of a norm. All right, 5. What was your take from Nat Turner's confession?
I didn't know that he saw it as like a mission from God almost, and I think that's kind of what guided his moral compass to kind of just be like, well, these people are human, but this is from God, so this is what I'm called to do for my people that are being oppressed. So.
And there's a lot to that when you think if you firmly or realistically do believe that you are supposed to do something, that all those other things like the aftermath, killing women and children, what does it all seem? Unimportant. It's not important. I'm doing God's work and what I'm supposed to do, to free my people from the oppression that's coming down to them. Were there, did any of the quotes jump out at you?
Yeah, I had believed it was like intended for some great purpose was one of the quotes, and then there was another one that he said slavery is the work of man, but freedom is the work of God.
That's a powerful one when you think about, again, slavery is man created, but God, doesn't want slavery, and so I'm going to do what God would want me to do in freeing him. Did you have one, Reese, or was that one of them?
Oh no, that was it.
Okay, all right. Let's go group 4. Anything you want to add about the slave codes, and either saying what the slave codes were or what the repercussions of those slave codes might be in the colonies?
I think like the whole idea of like the slave codes is obviously like to prevent another revolt, but we can obviously like see this like through some of the evidence, like it says like we weren't allowed to sit together in numbers after that Nat Turner business, and like another one says like illegal for enslaved individuals to gather for religious services. So this basically means like, they obviously didn't want them together because they thought they were gonna like plan another revolt, but I think it's like pretty like literal on like what it's like saying.
Yeah, and when you think about that, how that, because again, between 1830, how many more years do we have before freedom? 35, almost 40. Like, in the course of all of human history, that's not a lot of time. If you're living during that time, that's a long time. That's another 30 years of kind of not just oppression, but increased oppression, increased fear, especially in Southampton County in Virginia, where the legacy of Nat Turner is definitely still alive 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, and in their slave codes, all those kind of things.
Like repercussions, it says at the bottom, reinforcing gross slavery ideology. So like raising your kids that way to like start up that kind of movement again. So I think that was kind of crazy how they were kind of doing actually like the opposite of what Nat Turner was like intending for.
And that's when we start really, so then you got to just go into the idea of what was his intention, what was he doing it for? Because if we add in the repercussions, what's the answer almost always going to be?
Yeah.
He shouldn't have done it. And then we kind of go, but what are we doing 150 years later?
Studying it.
Talking about him in a classroom about the legacy of who he was and what he did. And so there is something to that resiliency, but it kind of makes it interesting to think about the revolt. All right, let's go group through 3.
Yeah.
Back to Nat Turner.
I like the part where he said Turner justified the violence as necessary to strike at the heart of an inherently violent and oppressive system. Because at that point, it's in his mind, it's not him making this outburst of violence. It's almost like a self-defense issue where he sees all this violence and he's like, we have to do something about it. My only way of doing that is just killing everybody, which is justified because it's self-defense.
And we might argue, that's a great point, we might argue there are other ways to do it. What would those other ways be?
They can't exactly hold a protest.
So we'd say, how about a protest? No. How about writing the legislature? No. How about buying freedom with money? No, can't do that. And so we get to this, and the analogy I always like to give to people, because we do it with John Brown too. If you know that your mom or dad are being held in that apartment over there, and they're being abused, you've been told if you call the police, they're going to kill them right away. Your only way to get them free is for you to go and try and free them. Who would risk your life and take the life of the other person to do that? Raise your hand. To free your mother or father from being abused and hurt. I think, unless you're in an abusive home where your parents are doing some shit to you, I think most hands are going to go up. So then it becomes, the weird part of it becomes, who is Nat Turner doing it for?
His family.
Everyone. It wasn't his. Could he have easily taken his mom and just rode off and gone somewhere? Easily. He could have killed his slave owner himself, said, we're free, gotten in a cart with his wife and his mom and everybody, and just taken the Underground Railroad and bounced to Canada. But he said, what? Yeah, I'm not free if everybody's not free, and so we're gonna do this as a collective group, and so kind of kept pushing it. All right, let's go 2.
So we said that the slave codes that were enforced had a really heavy emphasis on just putting the power even more into the white man's hand, and they did this with lots of just oversight. So it says that it became illegal for enslaved individuals to gather for religious services without the presence of a white minister. And then also in Virginia, passed legislation prohibited the hiring out of slaves unless approved by a white overseer. Everything had to be controlled by, like, essentially the white people. And then that also there was more slave patrol going around, because there was the threat of insurrection, and then that threat was also used as a tool for politics to support the pro-slavery movement.
Nice.
In the sense that they used it to essentially describe black people as violent and not deserving of freedom.
And something you said a minute ago that kind of connects to other people is that, what was the only place of autonomy for black people, really? The church. It was the one place where there was some kind of autonomy, where they could be free to do what they wanted to do, run it how they wanted to, and then that was taken away. And to go back to Jack's point too, that you also kind of reiterated, was it allowed for the pro-slavery talk to get louder, because if you're at, what did Northerners know about slavery prior to, like, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was written in the 1850s? What did they know about slavery? Very little. And so now you get this story out of the South that slaves are killing women and children. What's your brain say? They're bad. This isn't a, terrible, and so it allowed for that pro-slavery. We gotta be harsh, we gotta be strict to actually gain a voice and be a little stronger. All right, group 1.
So we noticed that in Nat Turner's confession, he was convinced that his actions were God's will, which allowed him to justify his actions pretty well. We noted that, like, the Bible itself has a lot of instances of violence, especially in the pursuit of freedom. So it wasn't necessarily unheard of to use violence to, like, free oneself, at least not in the Bible. We also noted some of his visions. One thing in particular was that they were very, like, powerful and very engaged. Like, white spirits and black spirits engaged in battle. Especially blood flowed in streams, which we noticed didn't note whose blood or, like, what race's blood flowed, which highlights that he, to some extent, understands that Nat and his fellow fighters can die, which played to the idea that Nat's religious fervence kind of overcame any fear he had.
Nice. I always think when we really understand America, we go, in the Declaration of Independence, what grounds do they cite for revolution being okay? What has to exist? Huh? See, you should have a basic understanding. What does it say in the Declaration of Independence? Well, why did we have the revolution? What kind of government did they say Britain had? A tyrannical government with a long trail of abuses, where this wasn't something that happened once or twice. So by every reasoning, what group had every valid reason for revolution in America? Black slaves. If you're going to use our own declaration to kind of define that. All right, just hang on to this stuff. We'll finish talking a little bit later.